Hello, welcome to another screencast, and this time I'll be talking about the alimentary canal and the peritoneum. And so by the end of this, you should be able to identify and describe here the four tunics of the alimentary canal organs. So all the organs are about the same basic structure there, with some modifications, of course, for different functions. Also be able to identify the four tissue types found in the alimentary canal organ. So we'll come back to sort of where we started at the beginning of the year, where we'll be able to see all four tissue types here in these organs. Number C, the two types of membranes found in the alimentary canal. So we'll be talking about the two membrane types there, the peritoneal membrane and the peritoneal cavity, be able to identify and describe what those are, as well as then the retroperitoneal cavity and any organs that are in there. So let's get started. Here are two images that we've seen in class already about the digestive system with its specialized organs and tissues. And we're going to be talking about thinking of the digestive tract, of the GI tract, as this tube, right, that is essentially starting here at the pharynx, so the esophagus, right, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine is really what we'll be describing here today. So esophagus, stomach, the small intestine, including all three sections there, and then the large intestine, which is labeled here. Oh, so all these colons here, right? So this large intestine, colon, sigmoid, right? All of this, right? Kind of all of this right here is also part of that GI tract of that alimentary canal. And again, the other image over here that's maybe a little bit more simplified is we'll be looking at this tube, right? So looking at the tube in cross-section, and this is also a tube in cross-section right here, but it is a little bit wider, right? So this alimentary canal right here is an organ. And again, remember, the definition of an organ is that it has at least two different tissue types there. So again, the four tissue types that we're dealing with are, of course, epithelial tissue. So epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. These are the four tissue types, and they'll be all represented here in the alimentary canal. So what you see here, this diagram, is a general diagram of any part of the alimentary canal. So if you took a cross-section out of the esophagus, you'd be able to see this stuff. If you took a cross-section out of the stomach, you'd be able to see these, identify them. You'd be able to do the same out of the small intestine, the large intestine. If you took a cross-section of it, you'd be able to identify these things here. So let's start our journey here on the inside and work our way out. So the inside of this tube right here is the lumen. So here is the lumen, and that is open space. And that open space, then, the cells that are in contact with that open space, of course, are epithelial cells. So the epithelial cells that line the alimentary canal are membranes that are open to the outside world. And so this membrane, of course, is the mucosa. So the mucosa is a membrane that's open to the outside world. And it is, here we see the epithelium layer, and that in the esophagus would be a stratified, right? Stratified squamous. In the small intestine, it changes to be a simple columnar epithelium. So depending on where you are, the epithelium type will change, but it will still be an epithelium. There'll be a lamina propria, or a basement membrane, just underneath that. And then in the case of the alimentary canals, there's this extra muscularis layer here, a muscle, smooth muscle layer. Right? So again, going from the lumen out, the epithelium, the lamina propria, and the muscle layer make up the mucosa. Right? So you may want to pause there and just take a look and see if you can identify those on this diagram. So moving beyond that, then, there is a submucosa. Now this is weird because here's the submucosa, and it looks like it's outside, right? But again, it's underneath. So we're starting here at the lumen and working our way down this way. Right? So the submucosa is mostly connective tissue. Right? It's mostly a connective tissue, but then you see some glandular tissue in there as well. So we'll highlight that up here. So here's a gland right here as well. So these glands, this glandular tissue, again, is lined, the epithelium extends here, so this is going to be epithelial tissue that's embedded in this connective tissue, the submucosa. And so you'll see here the ducts from those glands, right? And there's, again, a gland in the submucosa. So these ducts, these glands are going to be secreting, right? And so you have different types of glands at different types of at different points along the alimentary canal secreting their secretions into the lumen, right? Again, that's going to be lined with an epithelium, so the secretions would go this way and exit into the lumen, right? So you may want to pause there and identify the submucosa. Deeper to the submucosa then is the smooth muscle layer, right? So this is the muscularis tunic. And again, this muscular layer here, this is smooth muscle. So you have, again, this is going to be smooth. And the circular muscle layer and the longitudinal muscle layer. So if you remember back, right, to smooth muscle, there are two layers there, a circular and a longitudinal. And you can see how the fibers are arranged here. So the circular sort of goes around, the fibers are arranged this way. They go around the submucosa all the way around the circumference. And then the longitudinal muscle fibers are running the length of that. So when these muscles contract rhythmically, they're going to create this squeezing and propelling motion at the same time. So having these two layers of muscle contracting generate a squeezing and propelling motion. Right? So you may want to pause there and take a look at that. Embedded in this submucosa, right, and the muscular layer, you see lots of this enteric plexus here, and this is a fancy term that you don't need to know, but all these plexuses here are nerves. Right? So collections of nerves that are going to be innervating, nerves innervating the muscle and also innervating the glands. So you're going to have action potentials being sent to tell these glands to secrete, action potentials being sent to the muscles here to tell them to contract, right, relax, etc. Right? So the yellow here are the nerves, right? And so if you trace this enteric plexus is network, right? So that's what a plexus is this network. And then here's the nerve itself, right? And of course the nerves have different names depending on which part of the alimentary canal that they are innervating, okay? Let's keep going then. We're now almost all the way out. Again, we're traveling out from the lumen out to the outer surface here of the organ. And on the surface of the organ, then we have the serosa, right, or the serous membrane. Now, you'll remember that a serous membrane and a mucous membrane are similar in that they are secreting, right? But again, the mucous membrane is open to the outside world. This lumen is the outside world. It's open to the outside world at the mouth and at the anus, right? So to get across that mucous membrane, right, you'd have to go through cells. This serous membrane is a membrane that is secreting, but is on the surface of the organs and is not open to the outside world. So this is going to be lining a cavity, right? And so the serous membrane is called the peritoneum. The one that is directly on top of the organ is called the visceral peritoneum. You may have seen this before. Like if you're thinking back to the respiratory system that we did, you have a visceral pleura, and on the cardiovascular system, you have a visceral pericardium. Right? So kids will sometimes confuse those terms, peritoneum, pericardium. The peritoneum is the one that's on the organs of the digestive system. The pericardium is the one that's around the heart. So the visceral peritoneum here, right, is part of the serous membrane, right, and it has, again, a connective tissue layer and then a simple squamous epithelium. Right? So this membrane has connective tissue and epithelial tissue. This membrane has epithelial tissue and connective tissue over here as well. Right? So those are the membranes there. Now this serous membrane, this visceral peritoneum, is the outer surface of the entire digestive tract, the entire lumen. At some point, that visceral peritoneum becomes extended out into like a thin sheet, as you can sort of see here. And so this thin sheet is no longer really in touch with the the smooth muscle here, but this thin sheet of visceral peritoneum is called a mesentery. Right? So this is a thin sheet of the visceral peritoneum. Right? And so that mesentery, we'll see that in the next slide here in just a little bit. But again, that mesentery, you can see it's kind of like a sandwich here that is containing the yellow, the nerve, the red, the arteries, the blue, the veins, and then the green is lymphatic, right? So nervous tissue, artery, vein, and lymphatic tissue, all the nerves innervating, sending action potentials. The blood vessels then are delivering oxygen, removing carbon dioxide, and are also places for absorption. When stuff gets absorbed out of the lumen, it goes to the bloodstream. So it's not surprising that you're going to see lots and lots of blood vessels in the mesentery and around the organs themselves. Okay, so it might be a good idea here just to pause and review that. Maybe sketch that out and label it for yourself, if you would. So let's now talk about that peritoneum a little bit more. This is a sagittal section and a medial view of a sagittal section. And so you'd be looking from the inside out. And let's identify what we can see here. Well, here's the diaphragm up top, and then this would be lung and the thoracic cavity. So this peritoneum, there are two peritoneums. Right? There's the visceral peritoneum, which we just got done talking about, and that's all shown here in red. Right? And so the red is the visceral peritoneum. Right? And you see that that visceral peritoneum is right on the surface of the liver, it's on the surface of the stomach, it's on the surface of the small intestines. Right? Sorry, this is part of the colon. This is the large intestine, the transverse colon there. Right? It's on the surface of then all the small intestinal parts as well. And remember, I said that the extension of that visceral peritoneum is the mesentery, right? And so this purple is the mesentery proper. When we dissect, we'll be able to see this mesentery. This is a broad, thin sheet, right, that connects all the small intestine together. Right? There is then this mesentery is here as well. That mesentery is going to become continuous with then the blue here, and that blue is lining the outside of the abdominal cavity there. So this is the membrane that's in touch with the cavity, and so the inside wall there. And so that is, of course, the parietal peritoneum. So the parietal peritoneum is in blue, and you can trace that all the way around. That should be the outermost, right? It gets a little tight up here, right, where everything is connected together and comes through the diaphragm right there. But then again, here's the parietal peritoneum back there. Now, what you will notice is that that does not go all the way back to the spinal column right there. That there are some organs like the pancreas, like some of the duodenum here, and classically the kidneys, not shown on this because we're not far enough laterally, but then the rectum as well, this last part of the large intestine, as well as the bladder. These are outside the peritoneum, right? And so the ones that are not in the peritoneum are retro or behind, right? So in the retroperitoneum, right, these are retroperitoneal, right, cavities there. So the white here is the peritoneal cavity, and it's filled with fluid, right? And that's not unlike the pleural fluid. That's not unlike the pericardial fluid, right? So there's fluid in there. If you get an infection in here, you can get a swelling, and you get peritonitis. Right? That could be an issue, right, for several reasons. But again, you have some of those abdominal organs that are retroperitoneal, right? The kidneys also being one, but again, like I said, not shown on there. Okay, so might be a good idea to take a second, pause, think about that. Just one last thing I noticed here before we go on is that anteriorly here, there's a sheet of mesentery that comes off of the stomach and will actually cover the large intestine and most of that small intestine right there. Right? And that sheet is a specialized name called the Greater Omentum. And you see that here in yellow. So this is all the Greater Omentum. And when we dissect the cats, you'll see this Greater Omentum. There's lots of fatty deposits in there. And it's like a sheet. It's like a blanket. You could actually take this here and lift it up, pull it up over the liver there, right? So again, in sagittal view here, you could take this omentum and lift it all the way up, you know, over there to reveal the organs underneath, right? So you should be able to here identify the 4 tunics, and again, those tunics involve the different types of connective tissue, epithelial tissue, muscular tissue, and nervous tissue. The 4 tissue types found in the alimentary canal, right? The 2 types of membranes that are found in the alimentary canal organs being mucous and serous membranes, describing them a little bit. Talking about the serous membranes, specifically the peritoneal membranes, and then the peritoneal cavity, right? And then describing and identifying some organs that are retroperitoneal and what that means. Okay? Thanks for listening, and bring your questions to class.